Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode in the VK Calais project. It's taken me a while to get the editing done on these, so it's probably going to end up taking longer to edit all these than what I actually did to paint the car, and that was a couple of years. So anyway, straight into the painting this week. As you saw just before I held up the paint that I'm using, it's a Wanda 2K base coat. It's a clear over base system. This particular base coat gets mixed up at a ratio of 2:1 with the thinners, 2 paint to 1 thinners, and then sprayed on. You see here I'm just giving it a quick blow down with a air gun and a tack rag. Usually crank the air pressure up to a bit more than what I'm painting with while I'm blowing it down, and then bring it back down again. The gun is the GTO Pro Light with a T20 air cap in it and the 1.3mm tip, and I would guess at this stage I'm probably running the air at about 2 bar, maybe a little bit less. So that's the first black to go down on the car, on any part of the car, and I think it took me 1.5 years to finish it after that, or somewhere around there. I'd have to go back and look at the dates. I think the date on around this particular video is about the 20th of October in 2020, so unfortunately didn't get any COVID holidays, so I had to do all this in my spare time. Now, as you can see here, I'm pretty average at painting the inside of a bonnet, speed-wise, but it ended up getting everything done. So there's lots of tricky bits in the bonnet. There's holes in it everywhere that you've got to try and get the paint through so that it covers up any of the bits behind it. There's sort of ledges all the way around the outside, which when you saw me holding the gun over on the side to try and fire as much paint as I could up under the ledges to fill it all in. There's also a bit of a valley between the front of the bonnet and the stiffener ridge that goes all the way across it, so sort of got to get that as well from all different angles so that all the base coat there is all the primer gets covered. So I've left the full first coat of the base coat in there just to show you how painfully long it took me to do it. And there's even, probably can't see it in any of these videos, but there was some factory runs up underneath probably just underneath where the gun is there at the moment. So I deliberately left them in. I didn't sand them all the way out. So if you have a look at the bonnet now, you can probably still see them in there. Honest, they weren't mine, they were there before I'd started. But anyway, getting towards the end of the first coat, just walk around it and have a look to make sure that I haven't missed any spots up under the edge there. There's also a bonnet catch there that needed to be painted black. We didn't bother taking that one off. It looked like it would have been too hard to get back on. It's all sort of spring loaded, so best off just leaving it there and painting over it. So that was just the end of the first coat. Didn't bother recording the second coat. In fact, I probably forgot to turn the camera back on for it. But here I am in between the base and the clear coat. Don't fully pull the gun apart and clean it. Just make sure most of the black's out of it. Run some gun wash through it here just to give it a clean. After the first gun wash, there's a little bit of black left in it, so give it a bit of a clean around the edge there, and then throw a bit more gun wash in it. It seems it's shaking the thinners around inside it with my finger over the top there actually pressurises it a little bit, so when you pull the trigger it goes and cleans out. What I didn't show here was a little bit later on, I just went down with the thinners in the gun and then just sprayed it a little bit through. Basically sprayed it through until there was nothing coming out, and gave it a bit of a clean up there, and all ready for the clear coat. A little bit of black inside the gun's not going to hurt coming through on the first little bit of clear. So the clear that I'm using here is it's actually called General Paints. It's a high solids clear. It's their number 6000 clear. It goes in as a 2-to-1 mix, and you can add 5 to 10% thinners with it. So what I'm doing here is just putting a bit of tape on the mixing cup, just so that when I'm pouring it I don't really have to look at the small numbers that are on there. I can just go up to the tape line, and once it's at the tape line, stop there and then add the hardener in it and a splash reducer. And yes, I know the top of the can's a bit rusty. I don't go through that much clear here, so it tends to sit around for a little while, but it seems to work okay still. And the hardener that's going into it now is just the standard speed hardener. I don't really find much of ease for the fast hardeners. Possibly in winter I should probably use it. There's no heating in the booth at all. It's just straight. You can see the grill off to the left there is where the air comes into it. Flows down over the car or whatever parts you're painting, and then out through the other end, which is just the green fiberglass type filter. You can see it there on the right. So the fan's up on the roof and it just goes out through a hole in the wall. So giving the clear a good stir here, make sure it's all mixed up, and then straining it into the gun. I haven't been running strainers inside the gun for a while, but that's something I should possibly do again. I just had a little issue with them one day, so I haven't used it. Straining it into the gun should sort of theoretically be enough. So, but anyway, just get the fan right on it. I didn't want it too much coming out here, because you sort of got to put it on its edge and go up underneath under the front here that you'll see in a second. Sort of fire it under there, and the gun's sort of, you're only pulling lightly back on the trigger because you just don't want to flood that area all at once. And yeah, just spraying the clear on. Nothing much more I can say about this than same as the base coat, but a little bit shinier. So that's how it looked at the end of the first coat, which wasn't too bad. Starting to get a nice gloss up there. Probably gave it another 10 to 15 minutes worth of flash off time, and then got stuck into it with the second coat. Now in the second coat I worked much faster. At least I think I did. Maybe I sped this up. Can't remember. But yeah, much the same as the first one. Something I'll get used to over time, I suppose, is the speed that I can like get a bit more fluid coming out and just move it faster, I suppose. And although the inside of the bonnet's pretty finicky, so it ended up okay, even if it was a bit slow. So fairly happy, pretty shiny result. Nothing to fix up in here. Not that you'd really bother because it's inside the bonnet. As long as it's all nice and shiny and ready to go. So that's the first bit of black done and completed. Much more to come. Okay, so we made up this little frame to hold the bonnet yesterday, a little bit of this morning, and here's its first test. I've lined everything up so that it's going to land on there like that. What we've got to try and do now is get that leaned over. I'm not worried about these corners yet because they're not painted, not on the outside anyway. So I should be able to roll this back until that leans on there. And then put my foot down on that. In some form or another. And lean back. It's on a bit of an angle there, but I got the back up on wheels at the moment, so I can take them off. I'll probably put some rubber pads or something, or some other attachment on the end there. Maybe just put an attachment on this end here, with some feet down. Everything clears in there. It's sitting on where it would sit when it's on the bonnet, when it's on the car I should say. So those rubbers there are sitting in the spot where the rubbers screw in, and it's held up by the hinges at the back. So, well good, now I can start working on it. Okay, moving right along, start to work on the top side now. Just quickly here, cleaning up around the edge, any of the glue that sort of oozed out, just with a bit of 120 grit on a sanding block that's sort of got a bit of a radius in the corner there, so it's not digging in and creating a square corner sort of thing. So just taking off any of the bulge that's there. Now on the fiberglass, I've just run a bit of 180 grit on the over the gel coat just to rough it up so that it'll take any fillers. There was a couple little ripples in it which I tidied up with a little bit of filler, and probably looking at it at the end of the day, probably could have gone a little bit more with the filler, probably fill over the whole lot and then sand it back with a long block, because there's still a few little ripples in it, but it's not too bad. All the panels that went on the car are the original HDT panels, so as in from Holden Dealer Team, they're not copies or makeups or anything like that, so they're all pretty good quality to start with. They've all got their own little labels inside them, the HDT labels that are fiberglass into it with a clear layer of fiberglass over it, so no one can sort of put stickers on it at a later date and claim that they're them. You can just see there's an indentation on most of them as well, like you can see me sanding over the top of it there. So that plus in the middle of the spoiler on the boot has got that logo in it. So on to mixing up some of the high build primer. This stuff is Roberlo Primer Surfacer. It gets mixed up at a 4:1 ratio. And what I'll usually try and do is I'll put a bit of tape over the edge so that the thing doesn't get full. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This time it worked. Just so that when you're pouring it, and it's a pain to do out of a full tin, let me just say, it usually goes everywhere. So once I've figured out how much it is, just give it a quick wipe, rip the tape off it, and the bit where you put the lid is still relatively clean. So probably not relevant if you're going through a tin of these every couple of days in a panel beating shop or something like that, but if you use them once every now and then, it sort of pays to try and keep things as clean as possible. Now, having said that I don't use fast hardener very often, I've just found this old fast hardener lying around, so I decided to use it up in this one. Oh, I didn't use it up, there's still a little bit more left in there, but when it comes to the undercoats, you sort of want it to dry and harden as quickly as you can. Just the way that I work on cars, it's usually only on weekends, so one weekend I'll be painting it, next weekend I'll be sanding it, so there's generally no issues with things not being dry. And if you rush too fast into sanding something back, it might still be curing and shrinking back. The one thing about this filler, well, it's a primer surface, it's not really a filler. You can put up to 5-10% thinner in it, and the less thinner you put, obviously the thicker it goes on, but it just needs a lot of stirring to get it all to mix properly, so you got to spend a few minutes doing that. And I'm pretty sure when I talked about not using a gun filter before, I tried to use a gun filter on this stuff one day and it just wouldn't go through. So anyway, the gun that I use for this, I've got a GPI, DeVilbiss GPI. Had it for quite a few years now, running the 1.8 tip and the GP1 air cap on it. Tend not to run it at super high pressure, maybe 20 psi here or so. That way it just reduces the amount of overspray that happens. A little bit faster than doing the inside of the bonnet because it's a little bit easier. You can see down the centre of the bonnet scoop there where I did put a little bit of filler. And that was only like a super fine type filler as well. It wasn't a general bog sort of thing. I'm pretty sure it was dolphin glaze that I used in there. That all seemed to work out okay. that's the end of the first coat, and again, much quicker for the second coat. Disclaimer, may have been sped up a little bit as well. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was sped up. So that's the bonnet in the high build primer at the moment. I did notice as I was painting it yesterday there was a couple little pinholes opening up. Not sure how well you can see that. But I'm not... you don't really know how big the hole is behind them. You can put a little bit of filler in and it might fill up the hole. But what I tend to do is just get a drill bit. It's only a 3mm drill bit, just in your hand, and just open up the hole a little bit so you can see. When you put the filler in, it'll fill all that up anyway. And what's probably happened there is that there's been a little hole in the top of the fiberglass that I didn't see. So doing this, it's only in a few spots. Doing this will ensure I get a bit of filler in there, and I do that before I start sanding. I also noticed when I was painting it yesterday there was somewhere around here where there was a little bit of a low spot. I might see if I can try and find that again and put a little bit of filler in there as well before I start to sand it back. So I went through and filled the spots that needed it, and before I started sanding back, I've hit it with this dry guide coat. I think it's pretty much like graphite powder in a little container there with an applicator. It's really good because it sands out. It obviously doesn't take any time to dry, so as soon as you put it on you can start sanding. It doesn't clog up the sandpaper like if you put a paint on there could. There's not really in this application there's not really use of a wet guide coat. What I have seen though is the wet guide coat's used on something that's probably a bit glossier surface, and then just run over it with your hand like this just to spread it out a little bit. The applicator's sort of long since died on that, so it's much more better. Definitely don't just put your hand on it and rub it around and you end up with a graphite covered hand. So I've just put some 180 grit on the long block here and also on the short block. Now what I do with this is anywhere where I've put the fine filler, which in this case was the Dolphin Glaze, I'll hit it with the short block first, just directly on the filler itself, just to bring it down to the surface level of the rest of the primer. So, and also in any of these spots where I have put the fine filler on, I've gone through and sanded. You might be able to see a little bit of a pencil mark. There's probably a pencil mark that I put around where the defect is, and then I can sand back in the middle of it, just rough up the surface, then put the fine filler on, and then go and put the guide coat on and do the rest of it. So you can see here just going around all the spots that had that little bit of filler in. Probably just pinholes. Maybe if I'd picked up a low spot on it, like it was down the side, down towards the front of the bonnet a little bit further, and just general stuff like that. Now, I generally won't get everything perfect on this round. I'll probably have to go back and maybe do a little bit more fine filler again. But this part here is just purely getting this fine filler down to the level of the rest of the primer, so that it can be all blocked with the long block. So it generally doesn't take too long to do it, even though I did speed this bit up a little bit. And also you might notice in the background there that I'm just wearing socks. And what I've found is that any of this sanding I do is that I do it with the vacuum hooked up to it, so I don't get too much dust floating around, because I'm actually doing all this work inside the spray booth. I just don't have any other option. So what happens in any of this, whenever you get this fine powder, and especially on very dry days, which this probably was, you get a huge static electricity build-up, and I hate static electricity with a passion. So if I'm wearing my shoes around, the static electricity builds up in me, and anything you touch you get zapped with, which could also be dangerous if you're working with thinners and all that kind of stuff. So the floor's pretty clean, maybe a little bit dusty, but without the shoes on, it grounds me and I don't get static electricity all over the place. So anyway, back to the long block now, and you saw me before just putting a little bit more guide coat over the areas that needed it. And then you just essentially stand there for a while, blocking and blocking and blocking, and using the long block over the big flat areas to get it all as flat as possible. And you get to parts like this, you can sort of use it across there. And of course the bonnet's kind of sloping away here as well, so it's just better if you switch to the short block, run the short block across the bonnet. And like you see here, we're just running it up and down there. You see the guide coat disappears pretty quickly. There's a bit of a, I don't know if anyone knows the VK bonnets, there's a nice sort of sculpted line there just to the left of where I'm standing at the moment. So that just going to get done last after all the rest of the flat bits are done. And across the front here you can't really use the long block in here because the bonnet curves both ways. It curves front to back as well as side to side. So you just sort of got to pick the block for the application. In this case it was the short block that did all this. And you just keep working away at it until all the guide coat's gone, and hopefully you haven't cut through too deeply in most areas. What I've found works the best for me doing the last couple of cars is, so you've seen me put the primer surfacer on here, and then now we're in the sanding stage. I'm doing all this with 180 grit. What I've found is the best, and once all this is done, because you'll probably get a few cut throughs, is to go over the whole bonnet again with primer surfacer. Once you've done that, that fills up all the 180 grit scratches, and you can start with 320 for the next one. And then hopefully that next one is the last one that you have to do as well, so you don't cut through that one. But because you're starting with the 320, you don't have any of the deep scratches that you might miss when you're sanding with the 180. So I finished blocking this back now for the first time. Hasn't come up too bad. Just a couple of little spots where it's rubbed through to the etch primer. But I'll go on top of this again with some more of that 2K high build. I'll run it a bit thinner this time. And then when I block it back next time, hopefully don't get any cut throughs, and we'll also be able to start with 320 paper instead of the 180 that I did this one with. Just had a quick look over, and there doesn't appear to be any pinholes, so straight onto the sanding now, which I'll start with some 320 grit on the block. Really just need to flat any of the orange peel that's in it out, and there's not much because it went on pretty wet. And then we'll be ready for its final coat. Black and the clear.